In my review, I gave the overall consensus of the Valve Index that it's an amazing headset and it certainly is either the top choice right now or at least one of them. But you really shouldn't consider it unless you have a pretty powerful PC because let's be real, the Index is expensive. And if you aren't fully utilizing the resolution and high refresh rate, there are far cheaper options that will make more sense for you. Then I got a flood of messages and comments of people asking me if their PC is good enough. So today I have two PCs, a minimum VR spec PC and an above recommended spec PC. So let's truly see just how different the performance is between the two. So I think there was a little bit of confusion when I made that final decision on the Index. The idea was that Valve's HMD runs natively at 1440 by 1600 per eye, and the real selling feature of the panels is that they have the capability to run at a higher refresh rate, more than any other PC VR headset before it. This makes motion smoother and generally provides a really nice looking image. The problem is that in order to run games at that resolution and frame rate, you need a beefy PC, so unless you already have one, owning an Index kind of doesn't make sense because you wouldn't be able to run the Index at its full potential. If you could only hit FPS at a lower resolution than native, you might as well spend significantly less and get something like a Rift S. But it did get me curious, just how does the Index perform on a lower end PC? And could I have maybe been wrong about my conclusion? We're gonna find out. Basically, with these graphs, there is an equation that you can run, but for the sake of time, just know that at the very simplest level, 11.11 milliseconds means 90 FPS, and 7.4 milliseconds means 135 FPS. So we're aiming for sub 7 milliseconds here, so we could hit that 144 FPS. First, to get a baseline, we're going to look at the FPS for my main rig. The specs for this PC are a Ryzen 2700X, 32GB of RAM, and a GTX 1080 Ti. The games I'm going to be testing today are Aperture Hand Labs, Beat Saber, Pavlov, and Space Junkies. Quick disclaimer though, this is not a full benchmark, just running one game on one PC right next to another, an apples to apples comparison. However, it did not end up being so apples to apples, but I'll get into that in just a minute. Now let's pull out the bang for buck PC. This thing has been featured in a similar video when I first started my channel, but the situation is a little different. We all know that it can run VR, but can it run VR well enough to justify splurging on an Index, or can it even run the Index at all? This PC has a Ryzen 1500X, 16GB of RAM, and a GTX 1060 3GB version. I'm going to be testing the same games, and then we'll compare. Okay, so I'm going to interject real quick. This PC, which does meet the minimum specs listed, cannot run the Index at its native resolution. If I launched a game at that resolution, it would crash. Actually, it would crash everything. In order to get anything to run, I had to scale back the bang for buck PC all the way down to 1272 by 1416 per eye, as well as reduce the super sampling, while on my main rig, I'm running at 1952 by 2172 per eye. Aperture Hand Labs runs okay, but a little bit worse, and Beat Saber, I'm guessing due to the low super sampling and lowered resolution, actually ran better than the 1080 Ti system, but it's not really apples to apples like I said. And Pavlov and Space Junkies are a straight no-go. Both crash on boot up or shortly after getting into the game, unfortunately. I'm guessing this is due to the 3GB of VRAM that's on this 1060 versus the standard 1060, which has 6GB of VRAM. Of course, both systems are running completely updated BIOS, drivers, and Windows versions, as well as the most recent version of SteamVR, and all of the hardware, headsets, controllers, base stations are at their most recent update. So what does this tell me? Well, my stance is the same. If you don't have a pretty beastly PC or you don't plan on upgrading very quickly, the Index is totally not worth it. Put that money into PC components or get yourself a Vive or Rift S, both of which run at a lower refresh rate, a lower resolution, and inherently will run and look better than downsampling and running the Index at its minimum refresh rate. You'd simply just not be getting your money's worth. However, if you're in the middle of the line, like, for example, an i6 9600 and an RTX 2070, or even a GTX 1070 Ti, I'd say go for it, upgrade later, but beware, you're not going to be able to push the Index to its maximum potential. Even my system, which is pretty decent, can't fully utilize the Index in some games, but I'm kind of okay with that. It gives me some room to grow, and you too. So that was a quick little experiment. I actually had really high hopes for the bang for buck PC as it performed great with the Oculus Rift S and my old CV1, but I think the Index just pushes it a little too far, especially with the 3GB of VRAM. If you're in a situation and you have a GTX 1060, preferably the 6GB version over the 3GB. You can still certainly run VR apps, but I definitely wouldn't do it on the Index. At a bare minimum, I'd rock a 1070 or 1070 Ti, but legitimately, the better the system you can get together, the more you'll get your money out of this high refresh rate HMD. 2070, 2080, 2080 Ti, those are all good. And that's all, folks. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for Tuesday News Day, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell. Much love, Thrill out.